You hear it all the time. Get ready, stay ready, be ready, all that kind of stuff in hunting fitness marketing. But the question is, can you be physically ready to hunt at all times? Is that a genuine concept, or is it just marketing ploy bullshit? I'm going to give you that answer, and to do that, we got to start by defining a few training concepts. So let's head to the whiteboard. We got to start by clearing up some confusion. People often confuse fitness and readiness. They are not the same thing. So fitness is based on abilities to complete a task or series of tasks. So for example, there's fitness for running the 100-meter dash, and there's fitness for climbing Mount Everest. They're different things. They require different amounts of different physical abilities and qualities, but they're both fitness. Fitness is task specific, all right? Then we have readiness, which is access. That means access to the abilities. Essentially, it's your state of recovery. Are you in a position where you can have access to all of your strength, power, aerobic abilities, whatever, so that you can either train those abilities to push them forward, or you have access to them to perform? They're different things. We can't use them interchangeably. But what we can do is develop fitness in a way that gives us more access to our readiness more often. But we run into a problem in hunting fitness because there's a lot of training that tanks your readiness but doesn't give you any fitness in return. It looks like a constant barrage of intensity. So like every workout is a burner. So a good way to think about this is consider your training and your readiness like a bank account. So if you're making constant big draws on your readiness and you don't put anything back in, if your income doesn't match it, then you're gonna run out of money really fast and you're gonna put yourself into the negative. That's what that kind of training does, because it depletes your resources to the point where you don't have anything with which to recover. So we have to leave something in our bank account, in our recovery tank, so that we can recover and adapt to training. And we also have to be able to put those resources into our next training session. If we're constantly depleting our resources, which is one of the biggest problems with most hunting fitness programs, we can't adapt, we can't recover, and we don't have the readiness. What you start to see with stuff like this is you'll see people make a really big gain early on. So they'll feel fitter, it feels like they have more capacity. Then all of a sudden, they plateau really hard, and then they start going backwards because they just drew way too hard on their bank account without putting anything back in. There is a way to train that allows you to build your fitness and maintain your readiness, and to explain that, we gotta go back to the whiteboard. All right, so I gotta throw two more concepts at you. GPP, you done with GPP? And GWC. GPP stands for General Physical Preparedness. So that means all of the things that make your body generally resilient, able to adapt to whatever you might throw at it, and able to go out and do pretty much anything you want. So we're talking about mobility, movement capacity, strength, aerobic capacity, and aerobic power, okay? So then GWC is your ability to sustain work over time at varying intensities without fatiguing. The easy way to think about that is GWC, general work capacity, is GPP, general physical preparedness, plus output. So how does this work for us? Well, one of the big components of general physical preparedness is doing aerobic capacity work. That's the zone 1 and zone 2 work you hear people talk about. You hear me talk about it all the damn time. Now, what does that do for us? It does a lot of great shit. But the first thing it does is it builds the highway that takes oxygen and nutrients to our muscles. So that allows us to perform in the moment, but also we use it as our recovery system. We'll use it, I'll use a workout example. So let's say you're doing hard intervals. Let's say you push really hard for 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, so you're not gonna use mostly your aerobic system for that, but as soon as that interval is over, your aerobic system is gonna take over to replenish everything that you depleted, okay? And if your aerobic system isn't up to snuff, you're not gonna recover as you should between those intervals. The same thing happens between workouts. Your aerobic system goes to work to restore and repair everything that happened during that workout. Another thing it does for you is improve your autonomic nervous system. So one of the big problems with training super hard all the time, the way that I described earlier, is that it puts you constantly into sympathetic drive, which is fight or flight mode. I'm sure you've heard of that before. We don't want to live there, because if we live there, we're constantly using resources instead of replenishing them. When we train with enough aerobic capacity, we create the switch that allows us to flip from sympathetic drive to parasympathetic drive. When you have parasympathetic drive, think of like rest and digest, rest and recover, okay? We do that because there's a direct connection between your heart and the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve controls your autonomic nervous system. When you do enough aerobic capacity work, you increase your vagal tone, which makes it easier to flip that switch back to rest and recovery during a workout, and you actually don't get as sympathetic during a workout, but also between workouts. When you stop, it's easier to flip that switch, go back to rest and recovery, and restore and recover and improve your readiness instead of constantly depleting it. The second part of the GPP equation is that we have strength, mobility, and movement capacity as a big part of the equation. Now, what do those things do for us? First, they make us more resilient, right? If you move better and you're stronger, there's less likelihood that you're gonna get the piss beat out of you while you do stuff. If you don't get the piss beat out of you, there's less you have to recover from, and there's less wear and tear on your body. The second thing it does is it saves us a bunch of energy. So we look at things like relative strength. That's how strong you are relative to your body weight. The higher your relative strength, the less everything costs you, because each movement you make just costs less energy based on what you're relatively able to do. Another thing is mobility and movement capacity also save you energy. If you move well, you're more efficient, and everything you do just costs less. So when we look at those two things, it makes it easier for us to do more work, have more output, more general work capacity without a higher cost to our body, which maintains our readiness even if we're training consistently, we have higher volumes, and we're training more frequently. If we don't build these things and we just train arbitrarily hard and tank ourselves all the time, then our readiness will tank. We won't get what we need out of workouts. We'll hit that plateau fast, and then we'll slide backwards even faster. Now, one of the other big reasons that it all works is because it's layered. Everything you do from a GPP to GWC perspective happens in layers. And since we do that, it gives our body enough time to form the adaptations that we need to be able to progress our fitness while maintaining our readiness. So for example, it takes 8 to 16 weeks to get your initial aerobic adaptations. Same thing with strength, and even progressing it as you get farther along down the path, right? You need time for these things to happen. When you train for general physical preparedness and general work capacity, you plan your training so that you get certain adaptations before you worry about other ones. For example, you focus on aerobic capacity before you worry about aerobic power. When you do that, you build the highway that I'm talking about. When you have one layer laid, then you can put another one on top of it. Because it's planned so well and you have those layers, you can continue to progress your fitness year round, because you'll go through one phase, aerobic capacity, you'll layer the other adaptations you need on top of that, you'll get to specific work, which we're gonna talk about in a minute, and then you'll go into the season. You'll start that cycle over based on where you're at next season, and then you lay the layers again. Because we do this in layers, it gives us the chance to continue to develop our fitness while maintaining our readiness without tanking ourselves and continuing to improve our abilities. But the next step in the process is that specific preparation that I just mentioned. You remember when Naughty by Nature asked us if we were down with OPP? I'm about to ask you if you're down with SPP. Now, SPP means specific physical preparation. This is the specific things you do to be fit for specific outcomes. Some things require way more SPP than others. So for example, we talked about the 100-meter dash. They need very specific preparation to do their event. They have a known starting point, they have a known ending point, they have a known surface, they have a known time for the most part, and they have one very specific thing that they do to be successful in that event. So tons of specific physical preparation for them. You contrast that with like a special operator. They have a lot of unknowns. They sometimes don't know how long they have a good idea of what their infill might be, but they might encounter something that they're not expecting. They don't know how long their exfil might be. They have a good plan, but they might have to run into random variables. They're gonna go on varied terrain. They might have to swim, they might have to climb, things might move on them. It might be a lot of different things that happen. So they need a broader base of GPP and GWC than someone like a sprinter. Now, we fall more towards what a special operator might need. While we need specific prep for things like hiking uphill with weight, hiking downhill with weight, long pack ins, long pack outs, we need a broader base of GPP and GWC before we get to SPP. So we want to spend a good portion of the year continuing to develop our GPP and our GWC before we get to the preseason, where we work even more on SPP, which would be like hiking with weight, working on our uphill stuff and working on our downhill stuff. Now, that all said, it depends on the hunt. Some hunts are going to take a way longer runway of specific prep based on their demands. So for example, I'm in 2028, I'm going to the Himalayas with a client to hunt blue sheep. We're walking for like 4 or 5 days before we even get into sheep country. We have to do a longer runway of specific physical prep to be ready for that hunt. Now, if you're going out west, to hunt elk, to do something like that, yes, you still need physical prep that's specific. However, you just don't need as long of a runway on it. All of this stuff is also going to be dependent on the state of your general physical preparedness. So where is your current just basic level of aerobic capacity? Where's your strength? How well are you moving? All of that kind of stuff. Because if you jump into specific prep before you have your base laid with GPP and GWC, you're going to bypass a lot of the things that you need. And also, you can go out and be pretty well prepared by doing your GPP and your GWC well, and it's going to get you farther down the lane for that hunt. But also in the future, if you still spend more time on the GPP and the GWC end before you get to the SPP. If you just jump into the SPP stuff, you're not going to be able to account for all of the things that you might run into from a terrain perspective, from a distance perspective. All of that kind of stuff is going to add up, and you're just not going to perform as you need to. So we need to make sure that we have the foundation of GPP and GWC laid before we get to SPP, and the runway of SPP is going to depend on what you're doing for your hunt. All right, so now it's answer time. Can you be physically ready to hunt all the time? By and large, yeah, but you have to do the proper amount of GPP and GWC work and put it all into layers and progress over time to get to the point where you can be there. You also can't do training that just tanks your readiness all the time and doesn't give you anything in return. If you do this and you maintain your GPP, you maintain your GWC, you can take shorter blocks of specific prep layered on top and be ready to go for pretty much any hunt. Also, if you have your GPP and GWC in a great place, you can feel confident that you can go out and do just about any hunt that you want to do. It might cost you more. It might be a little bit harder than it would be if you didn't get to your specific prep, but you can feel pretty confident that you can go out and do pretty much anything you want and it not cost you too much. You still enjoy yourself. You can go anywhere you want and feel confident that you can get there and get out, get the critter, do whatever it is. So by and large, yes, you can be ready to do any hunt most of the time if you do the proper training and you layer it properly to get there throughout the training year.